What's up guys, it's Alex here, your friendly reef dog. Now in last week's video I mentioned that my phosphate level is running at 0.6, which of course is far too high. So today I'm going to share with you the ways you can reduce phosphate in your aquarium, and I'm going to tell you what methods I'm using to do so in mine. Now if this is your first time at the channel and you want weekly reefing goodness, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on anything. Right, let's get stuck in. First up, high levels of phosphate in your tank will inhibit coral growth and cause your corals to lose colour. And of course it can be the cause of nuisance algae outbreaks. It's open to discussion what counts as high phosphate, but as a general rule most tanks will do best at around 0.03 to 0.05 parts per million. Now there are many ways to reduce phosphate in a reef tank, but before you start buying phosphate removers, you should locate the source of your excess phosphate. Prevention rather than cure and all that. Common sources are having too many fish, particularly big fish like tangs, overfeeding your fish, in particular pellet food, and adding too much of certain coral foods like reefroids or phosphate in a tub as it's also known. It could also be in your RO water, so make sure you're changing your RO filters and DI resin regularly enough, or consider buying your own RO DI filter if, heaven forbid, you currently buy your water from your local fish shop. To be honest though, you're not always going to be able to work out the source of your excess phosphate. These are the main places to look, but it might be coming from something less obvious. For example, if you've been naughty and haven't cleaned your salt mixing bucket for 6 months. You should of course also test phosphate regularly to spot an issue before it gets out of control, but hobby grade test kits aren't always accurate. My Red Sea phosphate test kit was reading at 0.12 for months, but when I sent off an ICP test it came back 5 times higher, and it's been a similar story with several ICP tests I've sent off. So if you have brown corals that aren't growing and nuisance algae everywhere, you may well have high phosphate despite what your test kit says. Now before I sent off my most recent ICP test, I tried buying a new test kit as my previous phosphate test kit was over 6 months old and so about as much use as a snooze button on a smoke alarm, but I still got the same results. Now I could easily tell just by looking at my corals that something wasn't right. There might be other issues in my tank as well, but the ICP test has confirmed I have high phosphate, so I'll focus on that for now. So what's causing my high phosphate then? I doubt the RO water is the source. I've sent off tap water and RO water samples for ICP tests before, and while I do have phosphate in my tap water, I don't have any in my RO water, and I clean my salt mixing tub every few months with either citric acid or Milton's fluid. I am feeding my corals with Red Sea Reef Energy AB+, but my phosphate was high long before I started that, so that's either not the cause at all, or it isn't the main issue. Which brings me to the most likely source, my fish buying habit. I have 22 fish, which is quite a lot for 400 litres or around 105 US gallons, and more to the point I feed quite heavily, and have done for a long time, in no small part because I have anthias. A quick note on that point actually, my opinion on anthias has changed over the years, and I now think they're more hassle than they're worth. You have to feed them multiple times a day, they don't really shoal very closely, they bicker constantly, and mine lost their bright pink colours after being in my tank for only a few months. Anyway, I digress. I currently feed 2 lots of pellet food and 4 cubes of frozen per day, as well as the occasional strip of nori for my tang and foxface rabbitfish. Feeding a lot is a good thing as far as I'm concerned because it makes fish poop more, which fertilises corals. But if you have high input, you must also have high output, and because I have such high phosphate levels, you can easily see I haven't got that balance right. So now we've identified the source, we can start fixing the problem. Stage 1 for me is to stop feeding pellet food, which is probably my main source of phosphate. I'll still feed frozen twice a day, and if I can get my export back up to speed, I'll start feeding pellets again. But for now my fish will have to put up with a mysis shrimp only diet. And stage 2 is to work on exporting the phosphate that's in my system, which is where the main problem lies in my tank. My current nutrient control consists of weekly 10% water changes, a skimmer, a chaeto bed, and an automatic filter roller. But none of that is specifically targeted at reducing phosphates, so it's little surprise my levels are so high. Now there are a million options to reduce phosphate, so it can be a bit of a minefield, but the good news is there is one method that is undeniably better than all the others, and that is having GFO like Roaphos gently tumbling in a reactor. With the possible exception of a well set up algae scrubber, Roaphos in a reactor is the single most effective method for removing phosphate from a reef tank. Knowing when to change the Roaphos requires weekly testing, but as a very rough guide, once a month is probably a good start point. However, while it is very good at its job, I personally hate Rowaphos. Now this is going to make me sound like a bit of a diva, but Rowaphos is messy stuff and I find rinsing it in RO water before use and the actual process of changing it over to be a massive ball ache, which means I don't change it as often as I should, so it's not as effective as it should be. Now I don't mind admitting this is laziness on my part, and if I'm being honest, I probably just need to get over myself and get on with it. But given I don't like Rowaphos, what are my other options then? VRS TV often say an algae bed alone can control phosphate, but in my experience that's never been the case, and I'd guess you need to have a huge chaeto bed with an extremely powerful light for that to be the case. Aluminium based removers like Seachem Phosguard are much less messy than Rowaphos, but also less effective. And lanthanum chloride products like Quantum Phosphate Remover have become more popular recently. Although lanthanum chloride isn't actually a new product, it's been used in public aquariums for many years now and has been kicking around the hobby for a while. But personally I see lanthanum as a short-term solution and not something I want to use every day for months and years to come. Because my phosphate is so high though, I will probably use Rowaphos at least in the short term, and probably occasionally at least in the long term. It's just so damn effective. But my intention in the long term is to rely mainly on carbon dosing. Effectively that is adding a source of liquid carbon to your tank to encourage the proliferation of certain bacteria, which in turn eat the phosphate. Yummy yummy. There are loads of carbon dosing products, the most popular being Red Sea's Nopox. I've recently started using Tropic Marine's Elimi NP though. Supposedly Elimi NP doesn't just remove phosphate, it also allows the phosphate to be consumed by your corals, thus improving colours. And my strawberry shortcake Aquapora has improved massively since I started dosing the stuff. Now as I say, ideally I would like carbon dosing to be my only source of phosphate control, but I'm anticipating I'll have to continue my love-hate relationship with Rowaphos, at least to some extent. But with reduced feeding, regular carbon dosing and occasional use of Rowaphos, my phosphate should come down to a much more acceptable level in time. Now nothing good happens quickly in a reef tank, so slow and steady wins the race here. And this will be a gradual process with a lot of testing and adjusting doses of Rowaphos and Elimi NP. If you've got any questions, stick them down below. I'll update you with how this goes, so make sure you're subscribed for that. And as always, if you enjoy the video, give it a big fat thumbs up.